interesting to me that the phrase regenerative has picked up so much steam. But I think that's interchangeable with beyond organic. I don't think. On our farm that is. And so I think that's a...
Yeah.
Beyond organic didn't catch.
Right.
Regenerative caught.
Yeah. And I think one of the really cool things that Beyond Organic speaks to, in my understanding, a little bit beyond regenerative agriculture, is understanding how farms can be empowered to be economically sustainable as equally as environmentally sustainable, right? So taking the regenerative processes and looking at the wellness of the business as a whole. And one of the biggest pieces of that, I think, is making sure that your ecosystem is really thriving, right? Is helping you. If you're not protecting your land, you're not protecting your product as a farmer.
Totally.
Right? So can you talk a little bit about how in organic agriculture and then in beyond organic agriculture, you approach taking care of the stewardship and really supporting diversity
totally.
in the ecosystem?
I mean, the main thing is I don't think about any component as a singular thing. They're all connected to each other. And so biodiversity fits into that because the health of the crop ultimately is an indication of the health of the overall farm when I look at it. And because we're able to tell that story directly to consumers, we're able to add value to that. So I think one of the challenges in many farms is they're unable to provide value economically or even just motivation because they're not hearing from people or they aren't hearing that it's important and seeing that it's important. But I happen to know that our customers like hearing about the wildlife, right? They like hearing the stories about biodiversity. They understand that, biodiversity is a leading indicator of the overall health of a system or our environment. And so for me, it's never singular. It's like, how does this all work together? And I think, we have these fields, when you look around behind us, that we've just harvested and they're getting turned and ready for the next thing, whatever that's going to be. And that's where the attention is often focused on a farm. But my passion are the areas that connect the fields, like these areas, or our wildlife pond over here. And so when you look at, I have a friend who's a conservationist, and he talks about, man, if every farm just had their little corner where they made habitat, it would be so much better for everything. And so if we just look at this corner, like what's going on in this little spot, we're kind of near our event site. We see back up there's native plants. So we have the elderberry bush, which creates all of these seeds and food for the birds. There's all kinds of birds here. There's wild roses, which are cover, for the quail. All of that flowers. There's native grasses. There's deer grass up here. This is all creeping wild rye. That's mustard. There's creeping wild rye. There's some tules. And all of those things provide habitat or food for some different thing. It could be birds, which then helps, the insects, which then help the birds or the birds. There's predators, which are important. Then you have all these insects. And the insects probably don't get enough attention, but I think they're cool because they're actually, the right ones are doing the pollinating in the field.
Right.
So if I'm harboring this place where I have a home for native bees, well, I get kind of this built-in pollination service in my crops. Also, if I'm harboring an environment that has all of, the parasitic wasps and ladybugs, I'm building in like an automatic pest control program. Is it the cure-all, like it takes care of anything from living out there? No. But it all kind of pushes things towards a healthy environment, a healthy balance, which lets our crops do better, and ultimately the sustainability of the farm is significantly improved when you have places like this.
Right, and I've heard you talk before about good bugs and bad bugs, and they're both as necessary to a thriving ecosystem, but a lot of farms will focus on bad bugs, focus on a problem, not understanding the repercussions that that's going to have. So can you talk a little bit about what that cycle can do if it's not maintained carefully?
Yeah, and I think, so when you look at our cycle, you have this big mix of all these different things, and they're all kind of fighting and competing with each other. And sometimes you look at it and you're like, that's fine. And sometimes it's like, well, the customer really isn't gonna like that. I did a survey once and asked customers if they like aphid on their kale. They don't like aphid on their kale.
Shocker.
I believe they would. I believe they would be like,
protein.
we believe in what you're doing so much that you could send us buggy produce. I thought that. I was proven wrong by the data. But I think it's important to recognize that there are really these little specific things that just aren't acceptable. You know, there are cosmetic damages that can be caused that can just ruin the value of a crop. So in our system, we look at all that, and if we see one piece getting out of hand that's going to harm the value of the crop, we'll try to do something about it. In the other system, they don't want anything living out there.
Sure.
And it creates an interesting problem of like, they have pest A. Oh, well, let's go kill pest A. And so they wipe out pest A, and that suddenly creates the environment for pest B to show up. And so they kind of, now oftentimes they could do it quick enough where they harvest the crop and it doesn't matter. But it does promote this environment of, the insects are a monoculture too. And so you don't have this healthy ecosystem and balance of, you know, things regulating themselves, which nature is actually quite good at. It's developed millions of years of this, like, everybody's pushing and pulling, and they've created this healthy way to live together.
The original checks and balances.
Exactly. So we're trying to replicate that on this farm as much as we can, but still have the outcome, you know, be healthful fruits and vegetables that people eat.
Cool. So can you talk about a time when something specific that you guys are working on now that is meant to maintain that balance?
Yeah, I think my best example of that now are our owl boxes.
Oh yeah.
So you see right here is number 15, and you'll kind of notice them all around. And so barn owls are great for eating rodents. And in organic agriculture, I have no way to kill rodents, which is great, fine with me. Pesticide, or the things that they use to kill, you know, squirrels and gophers and rats are really nasty, and they, you know, they show up, they're blood thinners basically. And so they kind of, these little animals bleed to death, but then the predators and the birds eat them, and now they have those problems. Or the coyotes eat them, and now they have those problems. And so they're really unhealthy for the environment. So obviously in organic agriculture, we don't do that. But how do you kill all the, you know, the rodents cause problems. They'll girdle the trees and kill them. They'll chew on the irrigation line and cause a lot of damage. And so the barn owls, a barn owl family will eat like 1,000 rodents in a season. And so these boxes are meant to promote, you know, their existence. And they've slowly but surely, there's barn owl families living on all these. And so you think of like one barn owl box, well, that guy is going to eat 1,000 and create, you know, 2 or 3 babies that's going to move the other ones. And you suddenly are creating this, you're just like, you know, beefing up the offense in the game.
Yeah, totally.
And letting them, or I guess probably the defense, beefing them up and letting them play about. So, but that's my favorite example right now.
I guess it's the offense and the defense in this
yeah,
case,
right. Just kind of like weighing it.
That's cool.
And then I think, I can't not talk about it because we're standing in it literally. This is a sediment trap. And so the way this works is all of the water that comes off those hills back there comes down, and then there's drainage pipes, and it slowly makes it's trying to get down to Cache Creek, and it makes its way here. Cool. And erosion's a big deal. It takes 1,000 years to make an inch of topsoil. So you want to keep it there, and rain washes it off, and topsoil moves in moving water. And so if you could get the water to slow down, the soil will naturally fall out. And so this is it's called a sediment trap. You see over there that concrete thing. In the winter, we put the boards up, and what it does is it kind of holds water, and then it's forced to slow down, and then clean water flows over the top and goes down to Cache Creek. And then this thing slowly is being filled up with sediment that we just did it pretty recently, pull it all out and put it back on the fields. Cool. So we're literally trapping the sediments here and then reapplying them onto the field.
So sort of in a lot of regenerative agriculture practices are taking what nature has taught us, harnessing those resources and using them, you know, using man's skill to assist in a natural process versus totally change it, which I think is, you know, goes back to talking about GMOs and things like that, the comparison of the two. So that to help that process along versus let it lie and leave these resources right here, which maybe potentially a lot of organic farms and might not even realize they have these resources available to them because they're not thinking in that way.
Sure.
So? Can you talk a little bit specifically about what type of economic struggles? You talked before about how a lot of organic farms, there are fewer organic farmers, more people buying organic products, and a lot of that is because of the cost of organic farming. So when you employ regenerative processes, can you talk a little bit about how some of the economic stability is brought into the game as well?
Yeah, I think the unfortunate thing about regenerative processes is currently it's really hard to add economic value to them. So there's not a certification that everyone's widely accepted like organic where they're going to pay more for it. And so the only way you can do that is having this direct conversation with, our sales reps who are talking to the customers and saying, hey, this stuff's happening, it's important. And when you support this service, we're telling you how the wiring in the black box works, and we're getting, some of this money directly to the growers and paying for the things we want to do. And, while our company doesn't have a formalized, hey, here's the boxes and inspections or reviewing, we do have very good relationships with our growers. And, they watch these videos too.
Yeah.
They see what we're talking about. They're telling our buyers, hey, I'm doing this, it's cool. Our buyers ultimately are making selections from a holistic point of view about what's best for, what most closely represents what our customers are looking for. And I think there can be a better way to do that, but we haven't, we're not there yet.
Yeah.
And so I think when I look at what my parents did in starting organic and what that's turned into, the chapter on organic is turning.
Right.
It's still here, it's still part of the story, but we're at the end of the beginning of organics. And so now we need to start thinking about, hey, what does the future look like, and how do we become better at doing this regenerative stuff? And right now we have honest communication with our customers, and we have a culture of a holistic approach to what our farms are doing and what our purchasers are supporting, which is better than anybody I've seen. But I do see a lot of opportunity in continuing to do a better job with that.
Yeah, it sounds like what seems to kind of be championed is taking biodiversity and a symbiosis and sort of introducing that as a way of looking at the business model as a whole, because it's all tied to itself, and being able to get other farms to think that way, consumers to think that way, is so much a part of what we're doing.
Yeah.
Overall.
And our farms know, the people that we work with have learned that we're a good place to sell produce to.
Yeah.
Like our farm partners continue to partner with us, and they continue to be inquisitive about what our customers want, what we want, what's interesting. And so it's moving the right direction.
Cool.
But I do think that that's the chapter that we're opening now.
That's awesome.
Yeah, with the chapter of truth and transparency, and this chapter of, hey, there's all these ingredients that go into making our products, and we need to start caring about them.
Right.
We used to just eat food. When I was a kid, there were no ingredients on any of the food, right?
Yeah.
You didn't know what you were eating. And now we know that, and we're starting to evolve our behaviors around that. And I feel like that's the chapter we're heading into.
Cool.
As the progressive piece of agriculture is starting to say, well, hey, a carrot's not just a carrot. A kale, a bunch of kale isn't just a bunch of kale. There's all these ingredients. How the land was managed, what the resources were, how the people were treated on the farm, what is the biodiversity, where did it come from, where did the water come from, how was it transported? These are all important pieces that add up to make the tomato or the carrot or the bunch of kale. And we need to be, we need to looking into the future, we need to make that more transparent and make customers more involved in those decisions.
Like their great-grandparents were and
Yeah.
them before them. Yeah, cool.
Totally.
So establishing biodiversity, maintaining biodiversity. What type of check-ins, or how are you, when you walk through these fields, what are you seeing that we don't, that you want to make sure is really thriving? What are those indicators?
Yeah. So the most scientific one I have is there's a branch of the federal government, the National Resource Conservation Service, NRCS, and they're really focused on this stuff. And they won't pay for it, but they'll do cost sharing to plant hedgerows.
Okay.
And so all of this is a hedgerow paid for by an NRCS grant or helped by an NRCS grant. There's another one down there, and there's another one by the creek. And they come out every year and they do bug counts on native. They specifically have selected native bees as what they want to look for.
Sure.
And they've been doing this for over a decade. And I'm friends with the biologist that does the counts, and he called me up one day and he says, "Hey, Thad, you know, I just did your bug count, and your population of native bees is the highest that we've ever seen on any of the farms."
That's so awesome.
So
That
it's
does
like,
feel really good.
It works.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So I see that, and I see what habitat, wildlife is interesting. You don't always see it, or oftentimes you don't, generally not. And so I'm pretty good at recognizing, just because I've done it so long, like what lives where and what is actually living on the farm, which also means I could recognize on a farm when nothing's living.
Sure.